Coming home early was never supposed to mean anything. It was a small decision, almost insignificant, the kind people make without a second thought. The day had moved faster than expected, plans wrapped up ahead of schedule, and there was even a quiet sense of comfort in the idea of getting back sooner than usual. The road felt familiar, the surroundings unchanged, but something subtle lingered in the air, a feeling that couldn't quite be named. It wasn't suspicion, not yet, just a quiet shift in rhythm, like a note slightly out of tune in a song you've heard 1,000 times. The front door opened with the same sound it always made, yet it echoed differently. The house, usually filled with small lived-in noises, felt unusually still. No background hum, no distant movement, nothing to suggest life unfolding inside. It was the kind of silence that doesn't soothe but unsettles, pressing in from all sides. Even the light streaming through the windows seemed colder, as if the space itself was holding something back. Every step inside felt heavier than it should have been. Familiar objects looked the same but somehow distant, as if they belonged to a different version of reality. There was a faint awareness growing, not yet formed into thought, but present enough to slow every movement. A bag set down more carefully than usual, shoes removed without the usual rush, breath held just a little longer between moments. It was strange how quickly comfort could shift into something uncertain. The walls that once felt protective now seemed to watch silently. The air carried a weight that hadn't been there before, or perhaps had always been there, unnoticed until now. Even the smallest details began to stand out. The way a curtain moved slightly despite no wind, the faintest trace of a sound that didn't quite belong. There was no clear reason to feel this way, no evidence pointing to anything specific, yet the feeling refused to fade. It lingered, growing stronger with each passing second, threading itself through every thought, every step, every breath. What should have been an ordinary return had quietly transformed into something else entirely, something unspoken but undeniable, as if the moment itself was waiting to reveal a truth that had been hidden just beneath the surface all along. Strange silence isn't just the absence of sound, it has a presence of its own. The moment it was noticed, it didn't feel peaceful or calming. It felt deliberate, almost unnatural. A home that once carried the gentle rhythm of everyday life suddenly seemed to be holding its breath. The usual background noises, the faint clatter from another room, the hum of appliances, the soft indication that someone else was there, were missing. In their place was a stillness that felt too complete, too perfect to be accidental. Silence like that makes everything sharper. Every movement, no matter how small, becomes amplified. The sound of footsteps against the floor feels louder than it should, echoing slightly as if the space itself is listening. Even breathing becomes noticeable, uneven, as though the body senses something before the mind can explain it. It creates a quiet tension, a sense that something has interrupted the normal flow of the home, leaving behind a pause that doesn't belong. It wasn't just what couldn't be heard, but what could be felt. The atmosphere had shifted in a way that words couldn't easily describe. The air felt heavier, carrying an invisible weight that pressed gently against every step forward. Familiar spaces seemed unfamiliar, as though they had changed in some subtle but important way. The living room, the hallway, every corner carried a strange distance, like places remembered rather than lived in. Silence can reveal more than noise ever could. It invites attention, forces awareness, draws focus to things that might otherwise be ignored. The absence of normal sounds becomes its own kind of signal, hinting that something is out of place. It doesn't explain what is wrong, but it makes it impossible to ignore that something is. There was also a quiet sense of contradiction within that stillness. A home is meant to feel alive, even in its calmest moments. But this silence felt staged, almost intentional, as though it was covering something rather than simply existing. It lingered too evenly, without interruption, without variation, creating the impression that it was hiding more than it revealed. In that kind of silence, thoughts begin to shift. The mind starts connecting small details, searching for meaning in the absence of explanation. What should have been a moment of comfort instead became one of quiet unease, where every second stretched slightly longer, and every step forward felt like moving deeper into something that had already begun unfolding long before it was noticed. Subtle signs rarely arrive as clear warnings, they slip into awareness quietly, almost unnoticed at first. It begins with small inconsistencies, details that don't align with what is expected, yet are easy to dismiss if not looked at closely. A room that feels slightly out of place, an object not quite where it usually sits, a faint shift in the atmosphere that cannot be explained but refuses to be ignored. These signs do not demand attention, they invite it, gently pulling focus toward something that feels just a little off. There is a certain tension in noticing without fully understanding. The mind tries to rationalize, to create simple explanations for what it senses. Perhaps something was moved earlier and forgotten. Perhaps the silence has made everything seem more dramatic than it truly is. Yet even as logic attempts to smooth things over, another part of awareness remains alert, quietly collecting each detail, holding on to them as if they might connect into something larger. It is often the smallest things that carry the most weight. A faint scent lingering where it shouldn't be, a door not fully closed, a light left on at an unusual hour. None of these are alarming on their own, but together they begin to form a pattern. The difficulty lies in the fact that the pattern is incomplete, leaving behind a feeling rather than a conclusion. That feeling grows stronger with each step, each glance, each passing second. There is also a shift in perception that comes with these subtle signs. Familiar surroundings begin to feel unfamiliar, not because they have changed entirely, but because they are no longer seen with the same certainty. Every detail is examined more closely, every shadow carries a question, every sound or lack of it feels significant. It creates a quiet awareness that something is unfolding beneath the surface, something not yet visible but already present. The body often reacts before the mind fully understands. There is a slight hesitation in movement, a pause before entering the next space, a heightened sensitivity to everything around. It is not fear, not yet, but a kind of alertness that sharpens every sense. The heart may beat a little faster, not from panic but from anticipation, as if preparing for something unknown. These subtle signs do not reveal the truth outright. They guide the awareness toward it piece by piece. They exist in the space between knowing and not knowing, where intuition begins to rise, quietly insisting that what is being felt is not imagined but real, waiting just beneath the surface to be fully seen. Suspicious sounds don't arrive loudly, they slip in quietly, just enough to disturb the stillness that had already begun to feel unnatural. At first, it might be something faint, barely noticeable, almost easy to ignore. A soft shift, a slight movement, something that doesn't belong to the silence that filled the space moments ago. The mind tries to place it, to connect it with something ordinary, but the sound lingers just long enough to resist explanation. It's not the volume that makes it unsettling, but the timing. In a house that felt too quiet, any sound becomes significant. It breaks the silence in a way that feels intentional, like a signal rather than a coincidence. There is a rhythm to it, uneven and unfamiliar, carrying a sense of presence that had been hidden just seconds before. The contrast between the stillness and that faint noise sharpens awareness instantly. As the sound repeats, it becomes harder to dismiss. It begins to form a pattern, subtle but undeniable. A muffled echo, a brief pause, then another faint indication that something or someone is there. It doesn't reveal itself completely, which makes it more powerful. The uncertainty it creates pulls attention forward, drawing each step closer without fully explaining why. There is a tension in listening closely. Every sense becomes focused, filtering out everything else to catch even the smallest detail. Breathing slows, footsteps soften, and the world narrows down to that single source of sound. The distance between where it is heard and where it might be coming from feels shorter with each moment. Yet the hesitation to move forward grows just as strong. The mind starts searching for logical explanations again. Perhaps it's something ordinary, a door shifting, water running, something mechanical. But even these thoughts feel incomplete, as though they are being forced to cover a truth that hasn't fully surfaced yet. The sound doesn't match the comfort of those explanations. It carries something else, something more personal, more intentional. With each step closer, the sound becomes clearer but not necessarily louder. Its clarity removes doubt while increasing tension. It is no longer just a vague disturbance. It is a presence that can't be ignored. The awareness that something is happening just out of sight becomes undeniable, and the space between curiosity and realization begins to close, pulling everything toward a moment that has already begun to take shape behind the quiet walls. Emotional intuition doesn't arrive with clear words or logical reasoning, it rises quietly, deep within, before the mind has time to understand it. It begins as a subtle pull, a feeling that something is not as it should be, even when there is no visible proof. This intuition doesn't ask for permission, it simply exists, growing stronger with every step, every breath, every passing second. At first, it feels easy to question it. The mind searches for explanations, trying to dismiss the feeling as imagination or overthinking. But intuition has a persistence that logic often cannot match. It doesn't rely on evidence, it draws from something deeper, something built from past experiences, emotions, and unspoken awareness. It recognizes patterns before they are fully formed, sensing disruptions in what once felt familiar. There is a physical response that comes with it. A slight tightening in the chest, a pause in movement, a heightened awareness of everything around. The body reacts as if it already knows the truth, even when the mind is still trying to catch up. Every sense becomes sharper, more focused, as though preparing for something that hasn't yet been seen but is already understood on a deeper level. This kind of intuition is difficult to ignore because it doesn't stay quiet for long. It grows, pushing gently at first, then more firmly, demanding attention. The longer it is dismissed, the stronger it becomes, creating a quiet tension that refuses to fade. It turns small details into meaningful signals, connecting pieces that might otherwise seem unrelated. There is also a sense of clarity hidden within it. Even without full understanding, there is a feeling that the truth is close, just beyond reach. It creates a shift in perception, where everything begins to feel more significant, more deliberate. The environment no longer feels neutral, it feels charged, as though something important is about to be revealed. Emotional intuition doesn't provide answers directly, it guides toward them. It prepares the mind and the heart for what is coming, softening the impact while sharpening awareness. It is both a warning and a form of protection, allowing the realization to unfold gradually rather than all at once. And in that quiet buildup, it becomes impossible to ignore that something real, something undeniable, is waiting just ahead, ready to step out from the shadows and be fully seen. Discovery of betrayal is not a single moment, it is a collision of everything felt before with everything suddenly understood. All the silence, the subtle signs, the uneasy intuition, they don't disappear. They align. What once felt uncertain becomes undeniable, and the truth reveals itself not as a question but as a fact that cannot be undone. It doesn't arrive gently, it lands with a strange kind of clarity, where every detail becomes sharp and impossible to ignore. The mind doesn't need time to process what is being seen, it recognizes it instantly, even if the heart resists. There is no confusion in that moment, only a deep, unsettling awareness that something trusted has been broken beyond repair. What makes it more powerful is not just the act itself, but who is involved. Betrayal from a stranger might hurt, but betrayal from those who were once trusted carries a different weight. It reaches deeper, touching memories, shared moments, and the belief that certain bonds were unbreakable. In an instant, those beliefs collapse, leaving behind a hollow space where certainty once lived. Time behaves differently in that moment. It slows, stretching each second into something longer, heavier. Every movement, every expression, every detail is absorbed with intense clarity, as if the mind is recording everything, storing it somewhere permanent. There is no escape from it, no way to look away once the truth has been seen. Emotion doesn't always explode outward. Instead, it often turns inward, creating a quiet storm beneath the surface. Shock can feel like stillness, like a sudden emptiness where reactions should be. The response, anger, tears, confrontation, doesn't always come immediately. Instead, there is a pause, a deep internal shift where everything begins to rearrange itself. In that moment, something changes at the core. Trust, once given freely, is questioned. The sense of safety once taken for granted disappears. But alongside the pain, there is also a strange form of awakening. The truth, no matter how painful, removes illusion, it strips away false comfort, and reveals reality in its rawest form. Discovery is not just about seeing what was hidden, it is about understanding what that truth means. It marks the end of one version of reality and the beginning of another, where nothing can return to what it once was, and everything moving forward will be shaped by what has just been revealed. Shock doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it arrives as stillness so deep it feels unreal. In the instant when everything becomes clear, the expected rush of emotion doesn't always come. Instead, there is a pause, almost like the mind has stepped outside of the moment to observe it from a distance. The heart may be racing, but the thoughts are strangely calm, as if they've chosen clarity over collapse. That clarity doesn't erase the pain, but it organizes it. What was once confusion suddenly falls into place. Every subtle sign, every uneasy feeling, every moment of doubt begins to connect, forming a complete picture that no longer leaves room for denial. The truth is no longer something to question, it becomes something to understand. And within that understanding, there is a quiet shift from reacting to thinking. Shock creates a space where emotions are held back, not because they don't exist, but because something deeper takes control. It's as if the mind recognizes that reacting immediately would only give away power, so instead it chooses stillness, it chooses observation, it chooses to absorb everything before deciding what comes next. This is where clarity begins to take shape, not as comfort but as awareness. In that state, perception sharpens. Details that might have been missed before are now impossible to ignore. Expressions, movements, the smallest changes in the environment, all of it becomes meaningful. There is a heightened sense of control, even in a situation that should feel completely out of control. The realization settles in not as panic but as certainty. Clarity also brings a different kind of strength. It removes the need to question what is real and what is imagined. There is no longer any confusion to hide behind, no uncertainty to soften the truth. What remains is a clear understanding of what has happened and what it means. And within that understanding, something begins to shift internally. The role of the victim starts to fade, replaced by something more grounded, more deliberate. Instead of being overwhelmed by the moment, there is a quiet decision forming. To not be defined by what has just been discovered. It's not about ignoring the pain, but about choosing how to respond to it. Shock, when it transforms into clarity, becomes more than just a reaction, it becomes a turning point, where the mind moves from simply experiencing the moment to beginning to shape what comes next, holding on to control in a situation where it should have been completely lost. Silent observation is a choice that goes against instinct. In a moment where emotion demands to be expressed, where anger, shock, and hurt all rise at once, the natural reaction is to confront, to question, to release everything immediately. But instead of giving in to that impulse, there is a deliberate decision to stay still, to watch, and to understand more than what is visible on the surface. It begins with restraint. Every word that could have been spoken is held back, every reaction carefully contained, not because the feelings are weak, but because they are strong enough to be controlled. There is power in that silence, a quiet strength that refuses to be exposed too soon. While everything inside may feel like it's shifting, the outside remains calm, unreadable, almost detached. Observation in that state becomes sharper than ever. Without the distraction of reacting, every detail stands out more clearly. Movements, expressions, small exchanges, all of it is absorbed with precision. There is no need to interrupt the moment because allowing it to continue reveals more than any confrontation ever could. The truth unfolds naturally when it is not forced, and in that unfolding, deeper understanding takes shape. There is also a sense of distance created through silence. Instead of being pulled into the chaos of the moment, there is a step back, both physically and emotionally. This distance creates clarity. It allows the situation to be seen for what it truly is, without the blur of immediate emotion. The mind becomes more focused, more analytical, quietly processing everything that is happening. Choosing silence is not about weakness or avoidance, it is about control. It is the recognition that reacting too quickly can give away advantage, while waiting can reveal far more. It shifts the balance of power in a subtle but significant way. While others may act without awareness, the one who observes gains insight, understanding not just what is happening but why. In that stillness, something begins to change internally. The initial shock starts to settle, replaced by a steady awareness. The emotions are still there, but they are no longer in control. Instead, they become something to manage, something to use, rather than something that overwhelms. Silent observation transforms the moment from a simple reaction into something deeper. It creates space for thought, for strategy, for decisions that are not driven by impulse but by intention. And in that quiet, controlled state, the foundation is laid for everything that will follow. shaped not by emotion alone, but by a clear and deliberate understanding of the truth that has just been revealed. Controlling emotions in that moment is not about denying what is felt. It is about refusing to let those emotions take control. The surge of anger, the sting of betrayal, the weight of disbelief, they all rise at once, powerful and immediate. Every instinct pushes toward release, toward saying something, doing something, making the pain visible. But instead of giving in, there is a conscious effort to hold it all back, to contain what feels impossible to contain. It begins with awareness, recognizing that emotions, while valid, can also cloud judgment. In a moment where everything feels personal, reacting instantly can lead to choices that cannot be undone. Words spoken in anger carry a permanence. Actions taken in pain often lack direction. So there is a pause, a deliberate slowing down, where breathing becomes more intentional. Where each second is stretched just enough to regain control, the body may still react. Heart racing, hands tense, a tightness in the chest, but the mind steps in to steady it. It creates a boundary between feeling and action, allowing emotions to exist without letting them dictate what happens next. This is not suppression, it is discipline. It is the ability to experience everything fully while choosing not to be overwhelmed by it. There is strength in that restraint. It transforms vulnerability into control, shifting the balance of the situation. While others may act without thinking, driven by impulse or carelessness, the one who holds their emotions maintains an advantage. It allows for clarity, for the ability to see beyond the immediate moment and consider what truly matters. Controlling emotions also creates space for perspective. Instead of being consumed by the shock of what is happening, there is an opportunity to observe it with a clearer mind. The focus shifts from the pain itself to the meaning behind it, from the immediate reaction to the long-term response. It becomes less about what is being felt and more about what will be done with those feelings. There is a quiet power in not reacting the way others expect. It disrupts assumptions, changes the dynamic, and creates uncertainty for those who might anticipate confrontation or emotional outburst. Silence and composure become tools, not signs of weakness. In that moment of control, something shifts internally. The emotions are still present, still intense, but they are no longer leading. Instead, they are held, managed, and slowly transformed into something more focused, something that can be used with intention rather than released without direction. Hidden truth revealed is not just about seeing something unexpected, it is about the sudden collapse of everything that once felt certain. What was once hidden doesn't slowly come into view, it appears all at once, stripping away layers of assumption, trust, and belief in a single moment. The mind doesn't need to search anymore, doesn't need to question or doubt. The truth stands there, undeniable, removing every illusion that once made things feel secure. Exit powerful is not only the truth itself, but the realization that it had been there all along, concealed beneath normalcy. Every past moment begins to shift under this new light. Conversations, memories, small details that once seemed harmless, now carry a different meaning. The past is rewritten in seconds not because it changed but because its reality was never fully understood until now. There is a strange stillness that comes with this kind of revelation. It doesn't always bring immediate chaos. Instead, it creates a quiet, heavy awareness. The mind absorbs everything at once, trying to process not just what is being seen, but what it means. It is not just about the present moment. It is about the realization that something important had been hidden, intentionally or otherwise, and that the foundation of trust has been quietly eroded over time. The emotional weight of a hidden truth is different from other forms of pain. It carries a sense of being misled, of believing in something that was never entirely real. There is a shift from external focus to internal reflection, questioning how it was missed, how long it had been there, and what else might have gone unnoticed. Yet even within that questioning there is a growing clarity that what matters now is not the past, but the understanding gained in the present. Revelation brings a certain kind of finality. Once the truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. There is no returning to ignorance, no recreating the comfort that existed before. Everything moving forward must be shaped by this new understanding, whether it is accepted immediately or not. At the same time, there is a quiet empowerment in seeing what was hidden. It removes uncertainty and replaces it with knowledge. Even if that knowledge is painful, it is still a form of control, because it allows decisions to be made based on reality rather than illusion. The moment of revelation may feel heavy, but within it lies the beginning of a shift, where truth, once hidden, becomes the foundation for everything that follows. Double betrayal carries a weight that is far heavier than a single act of deception. It is not just the breaking of trust from one direction, but from two sides at once, closing in from places that were once considered safe. The impact is deeper because it intertwines relationships that were meant to exist separately, each built on its own foundation of trust, now collapsing together in a single moment. What makes it more complex is the overlap of roles. One bond may have been built on commitment, shared life, and emotional intimacy, while the other was rooted in family, history, and unconditional connection. When both are broken at the same time, it creates a kind of fracture that is difficult to separate. The mind cannot easily process which betrayal hurts more, because they amplify each other, turning what could have been a single wound into something far more layered. There is also a sense of being surrounded by the betrayal. It is not distant or isolated, it feels close, personal, and inescapable. The realization that two trusted individuals have crossed boundaries together creates a feeling of isolation, as though the space that once provided comfort has been taken over by something unfamiliar. It becomes harder to identify where safety lies when the very people who defined it have become the source of its loss. Emotionally, double betrayal creates a conflict that is difficult to resolve. There may be anger, hurt, and disbelief directed in multiple directions, each one carrying its own intensity. It is not just about what was done, but about who did it and what they represented. The mind tries to make sense of how two separate relationships could converge in such a damaging way, questioning not only the actions themselves, but the intentions behind them. There is also a deeper layer of realization that comes with it. It challenges long-held beliefs about loyalty, about boundaries, and about the nature of trust itself. What once felt certain now feels uncertain, and the idea of who can be relied upon becomes unclear. It forces a re-evaluation of relationships, not just with those involved but with others as well. At the same time, there is a shift toward understanding the situation more clearly. While the pain is intensified, so is the awareness. The truth, once revealed, shows not just the actions, but the reality of the connections that existed beneath the surface. And within that awareness there is a growing recognition that what has been broken cannot simply return to what it once was, because the foundation itself has been permanently changed. Feeling of humiliation in that moment does not come from what is seen alone, but from what it represents beneath the surface. It is the sudden awareness of being placed in a position that strips away dignity without consent. The mind registers not just betrayal but exposure, the sense that something deeply personal has been disregarded, reduced, and made insignificant in a way that cuts deeper than anger. Humiliation has a quiet intensity. It doesn't always erupt outward, instead it settles inward, creating a heavy, sinking feeling that is difficult to shake. There is a sharp contrast between how things were believed to be and what is now clearly visible. That contrast becomes the source of discomfort, as it forces an immediate shift from confidence to vulnerability, from security to a sense of being undermined. What makes it more powerful is the personal nature of it. It is not just about actions that were wrong but about the disregard for respect. The realization that boundaries were crossed so easily creates a feeling of being devalued, as though trust and loyalty were treated as something disposable. It raises unspoken questions about worth, about how something meaningful could be handled with such carelessness. There is also a silent comparison that often emerges. Thoughts begin to form, not necessarily logical but deeply emotional. Questions of why, of how, of what was lacking or overlooked. Even when the truth has nothing to do with personal shortcomings, the feeling of humiliation can make it seem otherwise. It shifts the focus inward, creating a moment where self-perception feels shaken. At the same time, there is a struggle between wanting to hide and wanting to reclaim control. Humiliation can create the urge to withdraw to avoid facing what has just been revealed. Yet beneath that urge, there is also a growing resistance, a quiet refusal to remain in that diminished state. It is in that tension that something begins to change. The feeling, while painful, also carries a form of awareness. It highlights the importance of self-respect, making it clear that what has been experienced is not a reflection of personal value but of someone else's choices. Slowly, the focus begins to shift away from the act itself and toward what it reveals about boundaries and dignity. Humiliation does not last in its initial form forever. As intense as it feels, it begins to transform when it is understood. When it is no longer allowed to define the moment completely, it becomes part of the larger realization, a piece of the experience that contributes to a deeper understanding of self-worth and the need to protect it moving forward. The internal shift from victim to strategist does not happen loudly. It unfolds in silence, almost unnoticed at first. It begins in the aftermath of realization, when emotions have surged and settled just enough to create space for thought. In that space, something changes. Not in what happened, but in how it is understood. The sense of being overwhelmed starts to give way to a quieter, more controlled awareness. At first, there is still pain, still the weight of everything that has been revealed. But alongside it, a new perspective begins to form. Instead of asking why it happened or how it could have been prevented, the focus starts to move toward what can be done next. This is where the shift begins, where the role of someone who was hurt starts to transform into someone who is thinking, observing, and preparing. It is not about denying the hurt or pretending it doesn't exist. The emotions remain, but they are no longer at the center. They begin to move to the background, making room for something more deliberate. There is a growing awareness that reacting without direction would only extend the impact of the betrayal, while thinking carefully creates a different kind of control. This shift brings a sense of distance. The situation is no longer experienced only from within the emotion but also from a place of observation. It becomes something that can be analyzed, understood, and approached with intention. The details that were once overwhelming now become information, something that can be used rather than something that simply hurts. There is also a quiet empowerment in this transformation. Moving from victim to strategist changes the dynamic entirely. It replaces helplessness with purpose, turning a moment of loss into an opportunity to regain control. The situation itself does not change, but the position within it does. Instead of being defined by what was done, there is a conscious effort to define what will happen next. Patience becomes a key part of this shift. There is no urgency to act immediately, no need to prove anything in the moment. Instead, there is a willingness to wait, to think, to allow the situation to unfold further if needed. This patience is not passive, it is intentional, driven by the understanding that timing can shape outcomes. As this internal change settles in, the emotional intensity begins to feel more manageable. It is still present, but it no longer dictates every thought or action. In its place is a growing sense of control, where decisions are made not out of impulse but with purpose, guided by a clearer understanding of both the situation and personal strength. The decision to not react impulsively is not made in comfort, it is made in the middle of emotional intensity, where every instinct is pushing in the opposite direction. In a moment filled with shock, anger, and disbelief, the natural response is immediate action, words spoken without restraint, reactions driven by pain rather than clarity. Choosing not to follow that instinct requires a level of control that feels almost unnatural, yet it becomes the defining point where everything begins to shift. It starts with a pause, not a long one, but enough to interrupt the automatic response. In that brief space, there is a recognition that acting instantly may bring temporary release, but could also lead to consequences that cannot be undone. The mind begins to weigh the value of restraint against the urge for immediate expression, and slowly, the understanding forms that holding back creates more possibilities than reacting without thought. There is tension in that choice. Emotions do not disappear simply because they are being controlled. They remain present, pressing for release, making the silence feel heavier. It takes effort to hold on to that silence, to resist the pull of saying something that might feel justified in the moment, but could weaken control over what comes next. This effort is not passive, it is active, requiring constant awareness and discipline. Not reacting impulsively also changes the perspective of the situation. Instead of being caught in the intensity of the moment, there is a step back, creating distance between feeling and action. This distance allows for a clearer view, where the focus shifts from what is happening right now to what it means in a larger sense. It becomes less about responding to the immediate event and more about deciding how it will be handled moving forward. There is also an element of power in this restraint. While impulsive reactions are predictable, controlled silence is not. It creates uncertainty, disrupting expectations, and shifting the balance in a subtle but important way. The absence of an immediate reaction leaves room for observation, for gathering more understanding, for allowing the situation to reveal itself further without interference. This decision is not about avoidance or weakness. It is about choosing intention over instinct, recognizing that the way something is handled in its earliest moment can shape everything that follows. By holding back, there is an opportunity to act later with greater clarity, with a stronger sense of purpose, and with a level of control that would not have been possible in the rush of impulse. Planning revenge quietly begins where emotional reactions end. It does not come from chaos or uncontrolled anger, but from a place that has already chosen restraint. After the initial shock has settled into clarity, there is a shift toward intention. Thoughts become more structured, more deliberate, moving away from what was felt in the moment and toward what can be done with that understanding. Silence plays an important role here. Not revealing what is known creates space to think, to observe further, to ensure that every decision is made with awareness rather than impulse. While others may assume nothing has been noticed, that silence becomes a shield, protecting the process that is quietly unfolding beneath the surface. It allows time to gather not just information, but perspective. Planning in this way requires patience. There is no rush to act, no need to create an immediate outcome. Instead, there is a careful consideration of possibilities, of consequences, of timing. Every step is imagined before it is taken, every reaction anticipated. It becomes less about causing harm and more about regaining control, about ensuring that whatever comes next is not left to chance. There is also a level of emotional discipline involved. Feelings of anger or hurt do not disappear, but they are redirected. Instead of being expressed openly, they are used as fuel for focus. They sharpen attention, making it easier to notice details that might otherwise be overlooked. This controlled use of emotion turns something overwhelming into something purposeful. Alleviates an advantage. When actions are not revealed too soon, they carry more impact when they finally surface. It shifts the balance of awareness, allowing one side to remain informed while the other remains unaware. This imbalance becomes a form of power, not through force but through understanding and preparation. There is a careful balance between thinking and overthinking. Planning quietly does not mean becoming lost in endless possibilities, but rather selecting a direction with intention. It involves knowing when enough has been considered, and when it is time to act, even if that action is still measured and controlled. In this process, the focus gradually moves away from the original pain, and toward the sense of control being rebuilt. What started as a reaction to betrayal becomes something more structured, something shaped by choice, rather than circumstance. The quiet nature of the planning does not make it weak, it makes it precise, allowing each decision to carry weight because it has been thought through rather than rushed. Gathering evidence is not driven by emotion alone, it is guided by intention and precision. After the decision to remain silent and observe, the focus begins to shift toward collecting what is real, what can be proven, and what cannot be denied. It is no longer enough to feel what happened or to know it internally. There is a need to ensure that the truth exists beyond perception, grounded in something tangible. This process requires patience and careful attention. Every detail matters, no matter how small it may seem. Moments that might have once been overlooked are now examined closely, not with suspicion but with purpose. Patterns begin to form, connections become clearer, and what was once a single discovery starts to expand into a broader understanding of what has been happening over time. There is a discipline in how this is done. It is not rushed, not careless. Acting too quickly or without thought could lead to gaps, to missed details, to information that cannot hold up when it matters most. Instead, there is a steady approach, where each step builds upon the last, creating something complete and undeniable. It becomes less about reacting to one moment and more about revealing a consistent truth. Silence continues to play a key role. Not revealing what is being gathered allows the process to remain uninterrupted. It prevents interference, ensures that behavior remains natural and unguarded, and allows more to be seen than would be possible if awareness were exposed. This quiet approach creates a clearer view of reality, free from attempts to hide or change it. There is also a shift in perspective during this stage. Emotions begin to take a backseat to observation and analysis. What once felt overwhelming is now approached with a sense of focus, where the goal is clarity rather than release. It becomes a process of understanding rather than reacting, where every piece of evidence adds to a larger picture. Gathering evidence is not just about proving something to others, it is also about confirming it within. It removes any lingering doubt, replacing uncertainty with certainty. Once everything is seen, recorded, and understood, there is no space left for confusion or denial. As this process unfolds, there is a growing sense of control. The situation is no longer something that simply happened, it becomes something that is being understood, documented, and prepared for. Each detail collected adds weight to what will eventually be revealed, turning something hidden into something undeniable, built not on emotion but on truth that cannot be easily dismissed. Maintaining a calm exterior is not about feeling calm, it is about choosing how to be seen despite what is happening within. Beneath the surface, emotions may still be intense: anger, hurt, disbelief, but none of it is allowed to show in a way that reveals vulnerability or gives away awareness. The outside becomes controlled, steady, almost unchanged, even when the inside feels anything but. This kind of composure requires constant awareness. Every expression, every movement, every word is measured. There is a conscious effort to keep reactions neutral, to respond in ways that do not raise suspicion or invite questions. It is not about pretending nothing has happened, but about creating a version of normal that others can believe. This allows space to observe further, to continue understanding without interruption. There is a quiet strength in this control. While others may act freely, unaware of what has been discovered, maintaining calm creates an advantage. It keeps the balance of knowledge uneven, allowing one side to remain informed while the other continues without caution. This difference in awareness becomes a subtle form of power, shaping how the situation unfolds without direct confrontation. At the same time, it is not effortless. Holding a calm exterior while managing intense internal emotions requires discipline. There are moments where the urge to react rises sharply, where it feels almost impossible to keep everything contained. In those moments, control is reinforced through focus, on breathing, on staying present, on remembering why that calm is necessary. It becomes a deliberate act, repeated again and again, until it starts to feel more natural. Maintaining this composure also changes how the situation is experienced. Instead of being fully immersed in the emotional impact, there is a slight distance created. That distance allows for clearer thinking, for decisions that are not clouded by immediate feelings. It turns the moment from something overwhelming into something that can be managed step by step. There is also an element of unpredictability in remaining calm. When strong emotions are expected but not shown, it creates uncertainty. It removes the ability for others to anticipate reactions, making it harder for them to adjust or prepare. This unpredictability adds another layer of control, not through force but through restraint. Over time, this calm exterior becomes more than just a temporary act. It becomes part of a larger approach, where control, patience, and awareness guide every step forward, allowing the situation to unfold without losing the ability to shape what comes next. Psychological strength building does not happen instantly. It develops quietly under pressure, shaped by every moment that demands control instead of collapse. What begins as a reaction to pain gradually transforms into a deeper resilience, not because the situation becomes easier, but because the mind learns how to carry it differently. Each decision to stay composed, to observe rather than react, adds another layer to that strength. At first, it feels like endurance. Holding emotions in place, maintaining calm, continuing to think clearly despite everything that has been revealed, it requires effort. There are moments where the weight of it all feels overwhelming, where it would be easier to give in to emotion, to release everything at once. But choosing not to, again and again, begins to create a kind of inner stability. What once felt unbearable starts to feel manageable, not because it hurts less but because it is being handled with more control. This strength is not loud or visible. It does not need to prove itself through outward action. Instead, it exists in the ability to remain steady when everything else feels unstable. It shows in the way thoughts are organized, in the ability to separate feeling from action, in the discipline to stay focused on what matters rather than what is immediately tempting. It becomes a quiet foundation that supports every decision moving forward. There is also a shift in mindset that comes with this process. Instead of seeing the situation only as something painful, it begins to be seen as something that can be navigated. The focus moves from what has been lost to what can still be controlled. This does not remove the impact of what happened, but it changes the way it is approached. It turns the experience into something that can be learned from, something that can shape stronger responses rather than weaker ones. Psychological strength also creates a sense of independence. The need for validation, for immediate resolution, or for emotional release starts to fade. Decisions are no longer driven by what others might think or how they might react. Instead, they are guided by a clearer understanding of personal priorities and boundaries. This independence reinforces the sense of control, making it easier to stay steady even when the situation remains uncertain. Over time, this strength becomes more natural. What once required constant effort begins to feel more instinctive. The mind adapts, learning to handle pressure without losing clarity. And within that adaptation, there is a growing confidence, not in the situation itself, but in the ability to face it without being broken by it. Turning pain into power is not an instant transformation, it is a gradual shift in how the experience is held and used. Raw form feels heavy and consuming, as if it demands all attention and leaves little room for anything else. At first, it may seem like something to escape from or suppress, something that only weakens, but when it is faced with awareness instead of avoidance, it begins to change its role. The process starts with acknowledgement. Instead of denying the hurt or trying to move past it too quickly, there is a willingness to sit with it, to understand what it represents. Pain often carries information about boundaries that were crossed, trust that was misplaced, and values that were ignored. Recognizing this turns pain into something more than just suffering, it becomes a source of insight. As that understanding grows, the focus begins to shift. The question is no longer just about what happened, but about what can be done with it. This is where power starts to emerge, not in controlling others, but in controlling the response. Pain becomes a driving force, sharpening awareness and strengthening resolve. It fuels the desire to rebuild, to regain control, and to ensure that the same situation cannot repeat itself. There is also a change in perspective. Instead of seeing pain as something that reduces strength, it begins to be seen as something that can build it. Each moment of endurance, each decision to remain composed, adds to a sense of capability. What once felt overwhelming starts to feel like something that can be carried, managed, and eventually used with intention. Turning pain into power also involves redirection. The emotional energy that once felt chaotic is gradually focused into something more structured. It may show in careful planning, in maintaining control, in making decisions that are not driven by impulse but by purpose. This redirection transforms the energy of pain into something productive, something that supports rather than destabilizes. There is a quiet confidence that develops through this process. It does not come from the absence of pain, but from the ability to handle it without losing clarity. It reinforces the idea that strength is not about never being hurt, but about what is done after the hurt occurs. As this shift settles in, pain no longer feels like something that controls the situation. Instead, it becomes something that has been integrated into a larger sense of awareness, something that contributes to growth and control, rather than taking it away. Strategic patience is not simply waiting, it is an active, deliberate choice to hold back action until the moment carries the greatest impact. It requires a clear understanding that timing can shape outcomes just as much as the action itself. In a situation filled with emotion and urgency, the instinct is often to act immediately, to resolve the tension as quickly as possible. But strategic patience resists that impulse, recognizing that rushing can weaken what could have been more effective if given time to develop. It begins with trust in the process. Even when everything inside pushes for movement, there is a conscious decision to remain still, to allow events to unfold further. This does not mean doing nothing, it means observing, learning, and preparing while maintaining control. Each passing moment is used to gather more clarity, to understand patterns, and to anticipate what might come next. The waiting itself becomes purposeful, filled with quiet activity beneath the surface. There is a discipline required to sustain this kind of patience. Doubt can appear, questioning whether waiting is the right choice, or if action should have already been taken. The pressure to act can grow stronger, especially when emotions are still present. Maintaining patience in those moments requires a steady focus on the bigger picture, on what is ultimately trying to be achieved rather than what feels immediately satisfying. Strategic patience also creates an advantage. When one side is willing to wait while the other continues without awareness, the balance shifts. More information becomes available, more opportunities emerge, and the situation reveals itself more completely. This added understanding allows for decisions that are not only more informed but also more precise. There is also a sense of control that develops through this approach. Instead of reacting to circumstances as they happen, there is a shift toward shaping how those circumstances will be addressed. Waiting becomes a tool, not a limitation. It allows for better positioning, for choosing the right moment when actions will carry the most weight and be least expected. Over time, patience begins to feel less like restraint and more like strength. It becomes easier to hold back, to trust that the right moment will present itself. The focus remains steady, not distracted by temporary emotions or impulses. In this state, waiting is no longer passive, it is intentional, guided by awareness and purpose, ensuring that when action finally comes, it is not driven by urgency but by precision and control. Setting the stage for justice begins long before any visible action takes place. It is a quiet preparation, shaped by everything that has already been observed, understood, and carefully held back. After gathering clarity and maintaining control, the focus shifts toward creating the right conditions where truth can stand on its own, without distortion or interference. This stage is not about confrontation yet, but about alignment, ensuring that every element is in place for what is to come. It requires a deep awareness of timing, environment, and impact. Acting too early can weaken the outcome, while waiting too long can allow the moment to lose its strength. Finding that balance becomes essential. Each detail is considered: where it will happen, how it will unfold, and who will be present or aware. These choices are not random, they are intentional, designed to ensure that when the truth is revealed, it cannot be dismissed or easily denied. There is also a focus on structure. Justice, in this sense, is not chaotic or emotional, it is organized and deliberate. It involves arranging facts, understanding sequences, and ensuring that everything connects clearly. This structure creates a sense of inevitability, where the outcome feels less like an attack and more like a natural result of what has already been set in motion. Control remains central during this phase. Emotions are still present, but they are no longer leading the process. Instead, they are kept in check, allowing decisions to be made with clarity rather than intensity. This control ensures that nothing is done out of impulse, that every step contributes to the larger goal rather than distracting from it. There is also an element of anticipation. Knowing that the moment is approaching creates a quiet tension, but it is different from the earlier stages. It is not driven by uncertainty, but by readiness. Everything that needed to be understood has been understood, everything that needed to be prepared has been prepared. What remains is the execution, the point where preparation meets action. Setting the stage also involves confidence in what has been built. There is no longer a need to question or second guess. The process has been thorough, the foundation solid. This confidence allows for a steady approach, where the focus is not on reacting to possible outcomes, but on allowing the planned moment to unfold as intended. In this phase, nothing is left to chance. Every detail contributes to a larger design, ensuring that when the truth finally steps forward, it does so with clarity, strength, and a sense of inevitability that cannot be easily undone. Calculated exposure is not about sudden revelation, it is about revealing the truth in a way that carries maximum clarity and impact. After everything has been observed, understood, and prepared, this moment becomes the point where silence is finally broken, but not carelessly. Every detail that is brought forward is chosen with intention, ensuring that what is revealed cannot be dismissed, denied, or misunderstood. It begins with control over how much is shown and when. There is no rush to release everything at once. Instead, the truth is presented in a way that allows it to unfold, piece by piece if necessary, creating a clear and undeniable picture. This approach prevents confusion and strengthens the effect, as each part supports the next, building toward a complete understanding rather than overwhelming with scattered information. There is also a strong awareness of environment during this stage. Where and how the exposure happens can shape its impact significantly. It is not left to chance, it is chosen carefully to ensure that the truth reaches the right space, whether that is private or public, direct or indirect. The goal is not simply to reveal, but to ensure that the revelation carries weight and cannot be easily ignored or minimized. Emotional control remains essential here. Even at the moment of exposure, there is no need for raised voices or dramatic reactions. The strength lies in the truth itself, not in how loudly it is delivered. Maintaining composure reinforces credibility, making it clear that what is being presented is not driven by impulse but by certainty and preparation. Calculated exposure also shifts the balance of power completely. What was once hidden is now visible, and those who relied on secrecy are left without control over the narrative. The advantage moves to the one who reveals, not because of aggression, but because of clarity. When truth is presented with precision, it leaves little room for manipulation or distortion. There is also a sense of finality in this moment. Once the truth is exposed, it cannot return to being hidden. It changes the dynamic permanently, forcing acknowledgement even if it is uncomfortable. The carefully planned nature of this step ensures that the outcome is not left to interpretation, but stands on its own as something undeniable. In this stage, the focus is not on revenge in its raw form, but on resolution through truth. It is the culmination of patience, observation, and control, where everything that was held back is finally brought forward, not in chaos, but in a way that ensures it is fully seen, fully understood, and impossible to ignore. Emotional detachment does not mean the absence of feeling. It means creating space between what is felt and how it is allowed to influence actions. After the intensity of discovery, control, and preparation, there comes a point where emotions begin to lose their grip, not because they disappear, but because they are no longer given the same authority. The situation is no longer experienced only through pain or anger, but through a clearer, more balanced awareness. This shift happens gradually. At first, emotions may still rise strongly, but they are observed rather than immediately acted upon. There is a growing ability to step back internally, to notice what is being felt without becoming consumed by it. This creates a kind of distance, not from the situation itself but from the emotional weight attached to it. That distance allows for clearer thinking and more deliberate choices. Detachment also changes perspective. Instead of viewing everything through a personal lens, where every action feels like a direct attack, there is a broader understanding of the situation. It becomes easier to see behaviors and patterns without attaching immediate emotional judgment to them. This does not excuse what has happened, but it removes the overwhelming intensity that once made it difficult to think clearly. There is a sense of calm that begins to replace the earlier turbulence. It is not a forced calm, but one that develops naturally as emotions are processed and understood. This calm brings stability, making it easier to maintain control even when faced with reminders of what occurred. It reduces the likelihood of impulsive reactions, reinforcing the ability to act with intention rather than emotion. Emotional detachment also protects energy. Instead of constantly reliving the moment or allowing it to dominate every thought, there is a shift toward focusing only on what matters moving forward. It prevents unnecessary exhaustion, allowing attention to be directed toward decisions, actions, and outcomes that are within control. There is also a quiet empowerment in this state. When emotions no longer dictate responses, there is a greater sense of independence. Actions are chosen, not triggered. This makes it harder for others to influence or manipulate reactions, as the usual emotional pathways are no longer as accessible. Over time, detachment becomes less of a conscious effort and more of a natural state. The situation is still understood, still remembered, but it no longer holds the same emotional intensity. It becomes something that has been processed rather than something that continues to control, allowing clarity and control to remain steady regardless of what unfolds next. Regaining self-respect begins at the point where the focus turns inward instead of outward. After everything that has been seen and understood, there is a realization that what was lost in the moment was not just trust, but a sense of personal value that had been quietly tied to others. That realization creates a need to rebuild, not by changing what happened, but by redefining how it is held within. At first, it may feel difficult to separate self-worth from the actions of others. The mind may replay events, questioning what could have been done differently, searching for reasons that make sense of the situation. But slowly, there is a shift toward understanding that respect is not something granted by others, it is something maintained from within. What was broken was not the value itself, but the way it was placed in the hands of people who did not protect it. This process requires honesty. It involves acknowledging the hurt without letting it define identity. Instead of seeing the situation as a reflection of personal inadequacy, it begins to be seen as a reflection of choices made by others. This distinction is important because it separates responsibility from worth, allowing self-respect to be rebuilt on a more stable foundation. There is also a conscious effort to set boundaries, even if only internally at first. These boundaries are not just about others, but about what will no longer be accepted, tolerated, or overlooked. They create a sense of protection, reinforcing the idea that respect is not negotiable. Each boundary becomes a statement, not spoken out loud, but understood deeply. Regaining self-respect also involves changing how one stands within the situation. The posture shifts both physically and mentally from one of being affected to one of being in control. There is less need to seek validation, less concern about how others perceive the response. The focus moves toward personal standards rather than external opinions. Confidence begins to return, not all at once, but in steady increments. It shows in decisions made without hesitation, in the ability to remain composed without effort, in the quiet certainty that what was lost externally does not diminish what exists internally. This confidence is not dependent on outcomes, it is rooted in understanding. As this process continues, the weight of what happened starts to change. It no longer feels like something that reduced value but something that revealed where value needed to be protected. Self-respect becomes less fragile, more grounded, no longer placed at risk by the actions of others but held firmly as something that cannot be taken, only forgotten, and then rediscovered. The power of silence is often misunderstood as emptiness, when in reality it is filled with intention. Silence in this context is not the absence of words but the presence of control. It is a deliberate choice to withhold reactions, explanations, and emotions, not because there is nothing to say, but because saying it too soon would reduce its impact. What remains unspoken begins to carry weight, shaping the situation in ways that words often cannot. Silence creates space, both internally and externally. Internally, it allows thoughts to settle, emotions to be processed, and decisions to be made without pressure. It prevents the rush of impulsive reactions, giving clarity time to form. Externally, it introduces uncertainty. When expected responses do not come, it disrupts assumptions, leaving others unsure of what is known, what is felt, and what might happen next. This uncertainty shifts the balance, giving quiet control to the one who chooses not to speak. There is also a protective element in silence. By not revealing awareness or intention, it prevents interference. It allows observation to continue uninterrupted, ensuring that behavior remains natural and unguarded. This makes it easier to see the full reality of a situation, rather than a version that has been altered in response to confrontation. Silence, in this way, becomes a shield, guarding both information and emotional vulnerability. At the same time, silence is not passive. It is active in its restraint, requiring discipline and awareness. There are moments where speaking would feel easier, where releasing thoughts and emotions would provide immediate relief. Choosing not to do so requires strength, as it means holding on to that energy rather than letting it go. That held energy, however, does not disappear, it becomes focused, contributing to clarity and control. Silence also carries a subtle form of communication. It can signal distance, resolve, or understanding without needing to be explained. It changes the tone of interactions, often saying more through absence than presence. When used with intention, it forces attention, making others aware that something has shifted even if they cannot fully define what it is. Over time, the power of silence becomes more evident. It is not about avoiding expression but about choosing the right moment for it. By holding back when necessary, it ensures that when words are finally used, they carry purpose, precision, and impact that cannot be easily dismissed. An unexpected twist in revenge does not come from intensity but from unpredictability. After everything has been carefully planned and controlled, the outcome does not follow the obvious path that others might expect. Instead of a direct confrontation or a reaction driven by visible anger, the result unfolds in a way that shifts the entire narrative. It changes the direction of the situation, not through force, but through surprise and precision. This twist is built quietly over time. It is not random or accidental, it is the result of observation, patience, and careful thinking. Every step taken before this moment contributes to it, shaping an outcome that feels both inevitable and completely unforeseen. What makes it powerful is that it does not align with assumptions. Those who believed they understood what would happen next are suddenly faced with something entirely different. There is a subtle satisfaction in this kind of outcome. It is not loud or dramatic in the way people might imagine revenge to be. Instead, it is controlled, measured, and deeply intentional. The impact comes not from chaos, but from the realization that everything has been understood and addressed in a way that cannot be easily countered. It leaves little room for defense because it does not rely on emotion, it relies on clarity. The unexpected nature of the twist also shifts the balance of power. It places control firmly in the hands of the one who planned it, while leaving others unprepared. This imbalance is not created through aggression, but through awareness. When expectations are disrupted, it becomes difficult for others to respond effectively, as they are forced into a position of reacting rather than acting. It begins to form through this twist. It marks a turning point where the situation moves from preparation to resolution. Everything that was held back, everything that was understood, now finds its place in a single, defining moment. This moment does not need to be prolonged or repeated, its strength lies in its precision and timing. At the same time, the twist often reveals more than just the truth of the situation. It reveals the growth that has taken place, the shift from emotional reaction to controlled action. It shows that what began as pain has been transformed into something structured and purposeful. In this way, the unexpected twist becomes more than just an outcome, it becomes a statement. What was done but how it was handled, leaving behind an impact that is felt long after the moment itself has passed. Public or personal revelation is the moment where everything that has been held back finally steps into the open. But the way it is revealed determines its true impact. It is not just about exposing the truth, it is about choosing the setting and manner in which that truth is allowed to be seen, whether shared in a private space or brought into a wider view. The revelation carries a weight that shifts the entire situation from hidden to undeniable. In a personal revelation, the focus is more contained, directed toward those directly involved. It creates an environment where the truth cannot be avoided or deflected, where every detail must be faced without distraction. This kind of setting allows for clarity without outside influence, making it harder to escape responsibility. The intensity comes from its closeness, from the fact that there is no distance between the truth and those who must acknowledge it. A public revelation, on the other hand, expands the scope. It brings the truth into a space where it can be witnessed, where it gains additional weight through visibility. The presence of others changes the dynamic, adding a layer of accountability that cannot be easily dismissed. It removes the possibility of quietly ignoring what has been revealed, as the awareness extends beyond a single moment or a small group. Choosing between these approaches is not random, it is part of the overall intention. Each carries its own kind of impact, and the decision depends on what outcome is desired. A personal revelation may focus on direct acknowledgement and closure, while a public one may emphasize accountability and consequence. Both require careful consideration of timing, context, and effect. There is also a sense of finality in this stage. Once the truth is revealed, it exists outside of control. It can no longer be hidden, reshaped, or denied in the same way. It becomes part of reality, something that must be dealt with rather than avoided. This shift creates a clear dividing line between what was and what is now known. Emotionally, this moment can feel steady rather than explosive. After all the preparation and control, there is often no need for heightened expression. The strength lies in the truth itself, not in how it is delivered. Maintaining composure reinforces that what is being revealed is grounded in certainty, rather than reaction. In this stage, everything that has been internal becomes external. The silence that once protected the truth gives way to clarity, allowing it to stand on its own, shaping the outcome in a way that cannot be undone or easily ignored. Role reversal does not happen suddenly, it unfolds as a quiet shift in position, where control moves from one side to the other without needing to be announced. At the beginning, there was a sense of being caught off guard, of reacting internally to something unexpected and painful. That position carried vulnerability, where the situation felt dictated by the actions of others. But as awareness grew, as control was maintained, that position began to change. The shift starts with understanding. Once everything has been seen clearly and processed without impulsive reaction, there is no longer confusion or hesitation. This clarity creates stability, allowing decisions to be made with confidence rather than uncertainty. The situation no longer feels overwhelming because it is no longer unknown. What once created imbalance now becomes something that can be navigated with intention. At the same time, the dynamic between those involved begins to alter. Those who once acted freely, assuming control through secrecy or carelessness, are now placed in a position where they must respond rather than act. The awareness that was once one-sided shifts, and with it, the sense of certainty they may have relied on begins to fade. This change does not require force, it happens naturally when truth and control align on one side. There is also a change in emotional presence. What was once heavy and reactive becomes steady and composed. The earlier vulnerability transforms into a quiet confidence, not because the past has changed, but because it no longer holds the same power. Emotions are no longer driving behavior, they are understood and managed, allowing for a more controlled and deliberate approach. Role reversal also redefines perception. Instead of being seen as affected or diminished, there is now a sense of strength and control that becomes evident through actions and composure. The absence of emotional reaction, combined with clear and intentional decisions, reshapes how the situation is viewed. It establishes a new position where respect is no longer dependent on others, but demonstrated through self-control and clarity. There is a subtle but powerful realization within this shift. Control was never truly lost, it was only unrecognized in the moment of shock. Once it is reclaimed through awareness and discipline, the entire situation feels different. The same events that once created instability now contribute to a sense of strength. In this new position, actions are no longer reactions. They are choices, made with purpose and timing, reflecting a complete transformation from being affected by the situation to quietly defining how it unfolds moving forward. The lesson about trust and boundaries does not arrive as a simple realization. It forms through everything that has been experienced, observed, and understood over time. Trust, once given freely, begins to be seen differently, not as something that should be offered without thought, but as something that requires awareness and care. What was once assumed to be secure is now understood as something that must be built and maintained with intention. There is a shift in how trust is defined. It is no longer based solely on closeness or familiarity, but on consistency, respect, and actions over time. The idea that certain relationships automatically deserve trust begins to fade, replaced by a more grounded understanding that trust is earned and sustained through behavior. This does not lead to complete distrust, but to a more balanced approach where belief in others is paired with awareness. Boundaries become clearer through this process. What was once overlooked or tolerated is now recognized as important. There is a deeper understanding of personal limits, what is acceptable, what is not, and what should never be compromised. These boundaries are not just external, directed toward others, but internal as well. They guide decisions, interactions, and the level of access others are given. Are not about control over others, but about protection of self. They create space where respect must exist, making it clear that certain lines cannot be crossed without consequence. This understanding removes the need to constantly monitor or question others, because the focus shifts toward maintaining personal standards rather than managing external behavior. The lesson also involves letting go of certain assumptions. The belief that trust guarantees loyalty or that closeness ensures respect is replaced by a more realistic view of relationships. This does not make connections weaker, it makes them more intentional. It allows trust to be placed where it is supported, rather than where it is expected. At the same time, there is a strengthening of self-awareness. Understanding boundaries requires knowing what matters most, what cannot be compromised, and what deserves protection. This clarity makes it easier to recognize when something feels wrong, even before it becomes obvious. Through this process, trust is no longer something fragile or easily shaken. It becomes more selective, more thoughtful, and more resilient. Boundaries, once unclear or flexible, become firm and defined, creating a foundation where respect is not just hoped for, but required and maintained through consistent understanding and action. Walking away stronger and wiser is not a sudden transformation, it is the result of everything that has been endured, understood, and rebuilt internally. It comes after the truth has been faced, after emotions have been controlled, and after clarity has replaced confusion. The decision to walk away is not about escape, but about choosing a direction that is no longer tied to what has already been broken. Strength in this moment does not come from what was avoided, but from what was confronted. Every step taken before this, observing, understanding, maintaining control, setting boundaries, contributes to a sense of stability that did not exist before. What once felt overwhelming now feels contained, not because it no longer matters, but because it has been processed and placed where it belongs. There is also a shift in mindset that defines this stage. Instead of focusing on what was lost, attention turns toward what has been gained. Awareness has deepened, perception has sharpened, and the ability to handle difficult situations has grown. These are not visible changes, but they are significant. They shape how future experiences will be approached, ensuring that the same patterns are recognized earlier and handled differently. Walking away also reflects a clear sense of self-worth. It is an acknowledgement that staying in a situation that no longer aligns with personal values is not necessary. This decision is not driven by anger or the need to prove something, but by a quiet understanding that moving forward requires letting go of what cannot be repaired in a meaningful way. A role here. It is not just about knowing what happened, but about understanding why it matters and how it influences future choices. It creates a more thoughtful approach to trust, to relationships, and to personal boundaries. This wisdom does not make one guarded to the point of isolation, but aware enough to move with intention. There is a sense of calm that comes with this step. It is not the absence of memory, but the absence of emotional weight that once made those memories difficult to carry. The past remains, but it no longer controls the present. Walking away in this way is not an ending defined by loss, but a transition defined by growth. It marks the point where everything that has been experienced is no longer something to be held onto, but something that has shaped a stronger, clearer, and more grounded path forward. Conclusion. In the end, this story was never just about betrayal, it was about transformation. What began as a moment of shock slowly turned into a journey of awareness, control, and self-discovery. Every silence held, every emotion controlled, every step taken with intention reshaped the narrative. The pain did not disappear, but it evolved into something stronger, something sharper, something purposeful. What was broken revealed what needed to be rebuilt, what was hidden brought clarity, and what felt like an ending became the foundation of a new beginning. Strength was not found in reacting, but in choosing when and how to respond. Power was not in revenge alone, but in regaining control, self-respect, and direction. This journey shows that even in the most unexpected and painful moments, there is an opportunity to rise differently. Not louder, not weaker, but wiser. Not defined by what happened, but by how it was handled. Good luck on your journey ahead. May you always find strength in your silence, clarity in your thoughts, and power in your choices. Thank you for listening, for reflecting, and for allowing this story to be shared with you.